Do you have questions?
Hi, Francis. It's not a question, just to share that when I have been on my own a little bit, I started to have the habit of like, oh, I'm going to sit down and meditate. And then I remembered what you said. The order is ignorant.
Is your mic on?
I think I can hear it a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe I just hold it closer. Where you said, ignorate, investigate, then meditate. And just that, and then celebrate for people. And just that memory broke that habit. So thank you. And before I kind of sat down and did a more habitual meditation, I investigated and I just wanted to thank you for that. That success broke a broke a habit, and then I was able to meditate when I kind of.
Yeah, I mean, if there is no enthusiasm to do a practice, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think I had, no resistance to sitting down and meditate, but I think I've developed a habit of not really meditating, but thinking I'm meditating and watching the breath and, kind of calming myself.
If you enjoy it, that's all of that is good. If you don't enjoy doing it, don't do it, It's like, humping dry the bunny, Okay. Tried to place it, but it didn't work. There was the opposite. Dry humping the bunny. Not humping dry.
Okay. Thank you.
My American slang is not perfect yet.
Not even close.
So I'm still stuck on the consciousness equals reality equals me equation, and I thought that my issue was I thought that my only issue was with the consciousness equaling being this one reality part, but I realized that even more fundamentally, that I still haven't firmly established that consciousness is the real I. So that the consciousness being me, or the one reality being the true me, that's why it seems so far-fetched. And I had assumed that because I know from experience that consciousness is not dependent on the body-mind, and I guess when we speak here, we often, when we say I, we often are referring to consciousness. So I had assumed that I was kind of good with that, but when I look at my thoughts and just the way I operate in daily life, I can see that for the most part I'm still operating from the sense that I am this body-mind, and that consciousness is, like we were saying last week, mind stuff that I then experience. And so I'm wondering, is that what you mean by how we can have certain understandings, but that at the feeling level there are still these habits that are ingrained that we need to investigate further?
Yeah, perhaps, but at least it's important to be clear at the conceptual level. First, let's go back to what you said when you said, I'm not sure that consciousness is the reality. Then you went on to say, I'm not sure that what I call I is consciousness. But let's address the first issue. There is perhaps a question of language here, of semantics. Remember that, because I make a distinction between consciousness and mind. And often consciousness is used as a synonym of mind. So my definition of consciousness is the reality which is hearing these words right now, without prejudging what this reality is. Okay? But my definition is the consciousness is the reality which is hearing these words right now. Now, a corollary of that is that if there is only one reality, and if consciousness is a reality which is hearing these words right now, then it must be this one reality which is hearing these words right now. Okay?
Yeah, well, that was what I'm still, even though, yes, logically I follow what you're saying, but it's still difficult for me to.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you have to investigate. It's a kind of a logical inference, that if there is only one reality, and if consciousness is a reality which is hearing these words right now, it follows that consciousness is this one reality. I mean, you can tap dance around that as long as you want, but it's
Well, but that's what I mean by understanding at one level, but then on the.
No. That I don't take this bullshit. No. Because okay, now I go to then the metaphor that applies to that is the guy who is in the red in his bank account goes to the banker because the banker has summoned it to his office, and the banker says, okay, there's your statement of last month. Here you withdraw that much at the ATM, and here you wrote these checks to the IRS for that much, and they try to cash the check. And you are in the red. And the guy says, yes, mathematically and logically you're correct, but at the feeling level, I don't feel I am in the red.
I mean, I'm not saying that it is rational, or that it. I'm not saying that
I want to clear that up first. I mean, because if you object to the logic of what I just said, then I resign from this job. You can object to one of the statements, but you cannot object to the logic. So which statement is it going to be that you object to? Okay, so I repeat it. Number one, there is only one reality. You may object to that, and then we go into it. Number two, consciousness is a reality which is hearing these words right now, because we are not making it up, in other words, that the words are being heard, right? There is an element of reality to this experience. Even if we are dreaming everything right now, perceiving of the dream is still going on, and my words as I speak are being heard, right? So there is an element of reality to perception. So, and this element of reality, I call it consciousness. Consciousness is the element of reality inherent in perceiving. So then, if there is only one reality, if consciousness is a reality, then consciousness must be the only one reality there is. So, in other words, either you challenged statement number one, there is only one reality, or you challenge statement number two, which is that there is an element of reality to perception.
But I'm not objecting to these statements.
So you're objecting to the logic of it.
I'm not even objecting to the logic of it, but I mean, you make it sound like it's such a natural leap to make that, well, I'm saying that it seems like such a leap to make, to think that this consciousness that I experience is the one reality. And again, I'm not saying it's a rational objection, but which is why, I felt that it still needed a little bit of baking, and which is why where my question was going was that, perhaps the reason why it seems like such a, or, tied to this kind of feeling of disbelief, or just the implications of that seem so inconceivable. So I was trying to sort of backtrack and think, oh, maybe it's because this thing of consciousness being the I, that seems even more fundamental. Before I can even investigate whether consciousness is universal, perhaps I need to first establish firmly that consciousness is the real I. Am I off-roading here?
Yeah, but I want to make one more argument other than the banker's argument to trust the logic and the reason, to trust reason over feelings. You say, let's take another example. You went home. I mean, you are too young for this example to speak to you, but as you get older, you will understand better. You go home in the evening, and from your home, on your cell phone, you call this friend, and you stay home. Don't leave. On the next morning, you want to go to the office, you look for your cell phone, you don't find it. But the logic is there. I came home, I had my cell phone with me because I'm certain I make this call to my friend. I can even call my friend on my landline to verify, yes, you made a phone, and yes, I have here, it was from, or my cell phone tells us that it was your cell phone number who called me last night. You have not left the house. So where is the cell phone logically?
In the house.
In the house, okay. And now you start looking in all the places where you put it, usually. And you don't find it. And you look again. And then you look in the most unlikely place and you don't find it. All the drawers, everything, everywhere. And then the doubt comes to you. Perhaps it's not in the house. Perhaps it dissolved into thin air. Whatever. You see? It must be. And then 3 days later, so you go to the office without the cell phone. 3 days later, you found it in the pocket of your bathrobe. Because you were coming out of the bath and you make the call, and then you put it in your bathrobe. But that's a very unlikely place because usually it's on the table, it's in the drawer, but the bathrobe, you hardly use your bathrobe, but on that day you used it. It was a little cold coming out of the bathtub. You see what I mean? But the logic was incontournable. So you have to trust reason. Otherwise you're cooked. Because there is no point going somewhere else and to say, okay, no, I'm not satisfied with the logic, I'm not satisfied with reason. it's not good for me, so I want to go to this guru, and this guru or this is going to tell me something that in the tradition there is that you find that in the books, that people have said that, and that. That you will buy bullshit.
So it seems like what you're saying is to just keep following that consciousness equals reality part.
Trust your reason.
But then what about this? So, because I've heard you say that, we may understand something at the conceptual level, but that in the feeling, the reason why, the whole reason why I brought this up was because you were saying earlier that you shouldn't do anything, a practice, unless you enjoy it. And it reminded me
unless you are interested in it. Yes, absolutely.
Well, it reminded me of the yoga that, we do at the retreats, which I can't really say I enjoy. And these yoga exercises, they're very challenging for me, and already, I know we're not even at retreat yet, but I'm starting to get anxiety, about having
Don't
to do
them.
this. But but of course, there's a part of me that wants to do it.
Read a novel instead. Watch a movie. Don't do that.
Well, but what I was thinking is that the yoga is meant to address these feeling level, patterns.
Yeah, but if you are not interested, if there is no interest in, then it's not going to work. It's not going to be efficient. You have to act out of interest, not out of a sense of duty or the same thing. You said something that I want to address, because you said, you impugned something I had said earlier, which is about pure, I don't know how you phrase it, but pure intellectual understanding of
the conceptual
conceptual understanding. Yeah, but the difference between conceptual understanding and I would say reason-based understanding. Let's first analyze the distinction there is between logic and reason. Logic is a pure process following some rules. Like a computer has a program, you put something true in, then if the program is good, you get something true out. You put garbage in, you get garbage out. It's the same with logic. Imagine logic as a computer. If you put something false in, you get something false out. So, conceptual understanding is what happens when you use logic and you put unverified facts, in other words, facts that may be true or not true, in, so the output may be something which may be a fact or not a fact. The difference between pure logic and reason is that reason includes more than logic. It includes the logical box with the input and output, but it also includes an experimental verification of the input. Am I clear? In other words, you want to make sure through experience that what you put in is true. That's why, in the case in point, I ask you, okay, number one, consciousness is a reality, which is hearing these words right now. Number two, there is only one reality. These are the two elements that we put in. the conclusion, yes, so then consciousness is reality, is simply the logic process, the logical process, which is very simple in this case. It's a syllogism, or it's inference by inclusion. But the hard part is the experimental verification of the two elements that we put in. You see, so that's when we move from pure conceptual understanding to reason. Reason includes experimental verification of the input. You see?
So the fact that I don't, that I'm having trouble accepting this logic, is that a lack of trust in reason, or is that an indication that I still am not certain about those inputs, that I need to do more investigation of the input?
I don't know. Take a rocket scientist designing an orbital station and the launcher to get there. And it makes to him a big difference. The calculations would be kind of the same whether there is inside the rocket, in the payload, there is just equipment, apparatus, or there is a chimp, or there is a human being, or he is the guy in the payload. You see what I mean? So the calculations would be the same, but there might be another psychological incentive to verify the math before boarding the damn thing. And rightfully so. We live our life in our culture and in the world culture based upon the assumption of a separate and limited reality, which we call consciousness or I. And everything around us, since we were born, everybody around us has acted consistently with this assumption. So we are prudent as human beings. We are cautious. And once we have lived from a basis which has been used for a long time by society around us, we are very reluctant to move to a different perspective. Through a sense of caution and that we feel safe and we have a hard time venturing out of the known. So it requires, if the goal is happiness, it requires some thinking, in particular, to see with an objective eye, does the old paradigm deliver happiness? Did it in the case of our parents? Did it in the case of our grandparents? Did it in the case of people around us, our teachers and so on? Did it deliver? It's important to, it's like we feel safe eating the same greasy food that our parents used, greasy and, and overburned food that our parents used to eat. Fish, beaver tails, for the Canadian. Feels greasy and keeps you warm in the winter. It is not the healthiest thing. So long-proven recipes are not necessarily as So we have to reinvestigate the old recipes for happiness and see how they have worked. They have worked for us and for the people around us and for society at large.
So just for my own closure, don't worry about the consciousness being dependent on the body-mind part.
About the consciousness.
Consciousness being, because I was thinking I still needed to address this notion of consciousness being the true I, that I was still having some, that I was still operating from the sense that I am the body-mind rather than consciousness.
But you see, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is to be clear as what you refer to as I. It's okay to say, for instance, driving my car, right? Somebody hit me in the rear. By me, hit me, I don't really mean my body, I don't mean my mind, I don't mean my consciousness. What I really mean by me is my car. And I don't want to ask you to correct the way you express yourself or the way you think about such an accident. It doesn't matter if you say, I was hit in the back. Because it's clear that it was your car. So same thing about your body. If you say me about your body, that's fine. The problem arises only when you say me about consciousness, the reality hearing these words, and then you identify it with the body or with the car. Or you see it as dependent upon the body or upon the car. So the thing is that with the car it's very clear that I never believe that my consciousness is dependent upon the car. But it's not the same with the body. You see, so that's the only sticking point here.
And then one last thing. So the yoga that you said you have to be interested. And I think you referred to the yoga as like a skillful means at some point. So are there any other means that are available for those who are not so inclined towards the yoga to address the feeling level patterns?
Well, the question is, are we inclined to discover? Are we inclined? And by discovering, I don't necessarily mean to discover something new, like Columbus discovering a new territory, but rather by discovering our own mistakes. Like if you learn how to play tennis, the discovery is not that you are going to discover the new backhand, but you are going to discover that your contact point was a little too much in front, for instance. What your mistake was. As a result, your backhand will improve because you discover. So are we eager to discover the mistakes we are making? You see, that's the only question. And most people, for a reason that I cannot understand, are not really eager to discover the mistakes they are making. They want to discover other things, to experience new things, but not discovering where they are wrong. I think that's something to think about. Because then something new takes place in us the moment we are eager to discover the mistakes we are making. You know, I refer you to Einstein coming to Princeton. He was asked, what do you need? He says, a desk, lots of paper, pencils, a huge trash can for all the mistakes I'm going to make.
Thank you.
In the same context, it's almost like sounding like there's like a leap that the brain has to make in order to allow that understanding to kind of permeate through the body. And there's a lot of fear associated with shifting the mind to this understanding. And when I say fear, it's like, it's not even fear like it's a problem, but there's just like feelings of fear just being observed, right? But it almost, just listening to this conversation was very helpful, but there's experience of a feeling of fear to let that understanding be the experiential truth.
It's our
It's overwhelmingly huge.
It's our attachment to the past. And you know, sometimes people say, okay, but if I investigate along the lines you are suggesting, can you guarantee me that my friends are not going to change? I mean, the people I associate with. Are you giving me any guarantees that my current marriage is not, or relationship is not going to, partnership to break up? Can you guarantee me that my political opinions are not going to change? Can you guarantee me, etc.? You see? And the answer is nope. You know?
But it's not guaranteed anyway, right?
But then it begs the question, what is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for keeping the status quo that obviously you are not happy with? Otherwise you wouldn't be here asking questions. Or, I'm not looking for you or for anybody, but the ones who want to keep this status quo. Are you, or do you want to be happy, even if it implies that eventually the conditions, the context is going to change? You know, so what is it going to be? You see? So the fear is there. It wants to maintain the status quo, forgetting that there is an inherent dissatisfaction about the current condition.
It almost feels like the wanting of happiness is at the bottom of the valley where you have to jump off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you have to...
Yeah. You have to jump off the cliff to get to happiness. I mean, it's really that's...
Yeah. You have to put it on top of the preferences, you know, just to jack it up.
Very helpful, thank you.
Okay, so on the tails of what you just said, the part about, are you willing to just let it go. So I'm really confused about, I have cancer. I have stage 4 cancer. And like, I'm in this place of peace, but I really want to live. And like, there's like a little holding back of just living totally 100% joyful. And then another thing is, I just listened to this one woman who died, and then she came back, and then all the cancer disappeared. So, like, I'm in a peaceful place with it, but at the same time, I feel like there's some way in which I'm not 100% in a peaceful place about it. But I still really want to be in a peaceful place. And I also want to stick around, because there's alternatives, there's all these ways of things to do. So there's something I feel like I'm not seeing yet.
We all die. As all bodies die. And the only question is, does the reality which is hearing these words right now die? We usually believe it does. Why? On which grounds do you believe that? Which evidence do we possess that confirms that the reality which is hearing these words dies when the body dies? If we investigate, we discover that there is no evidence whatsoever. That's our choice to believe that way is purely irrational.
It's purely irrational to believe that we die,
that consciousness dies when the body dies. It's rational to believe that the body dies when the body dies. There might be arguments made to believe that the mind dies when the body dies. But our reality, the reality which is hearing these words through this body-mind, we have no... You see, there is a window in the mind open to the infinite.
So I'm like in a place of how do you do both? How do you be totally, like I like that you said a window into the infinite. That for some reason resonated with me. But this is sounding weird, but I feel like it's my job to do everything I can to keep this body alive.
Yes, good. Of course.
But at the same time,
You are the manager of the body. You have to take good care of it. It's important. Life is more important than death. We have to honor life. In other words, we have to try to live without regrets. Without to do what is really appropriate for us to do. Sometimes wisdom is defined as a way to live our lives as if we had only 1 hour left to live. What would we do? Who would we call? To whom would we show love? You see, and which mistakes we may have made would we try to fix? You see. There is something in us that doesn't die, no matter what. And that's the most important. The rest is expendable. There is something in us that doesn't die, our reality. it's a short-sighted view to see life as a local phenomenon which is isolated from the rest of the world through by the barrier of the skin. Life is more the way the universe dances. And all the bodies within it. The body is not our reality. Our body is part of the universe. And the reality of the body is also the reality of the universe. Whatever that reality is, our reality is the reality of the universe. So the moment we understand that our reality extends beyond the body, it also extends beyond death. Stephen says, as I pay attention to my sense of self, I have a basic understanding that my so-called outward perceptions of the world are in actuality a holographic image in the occipital area of my brain with biodata feeds from my optic nerves, ears, and other neural sensors. For my understanding of physics, the space between my subatomic particles, molecules, as well as outside my skin, is one seamless spatial reality. So my question is space conscious? Is space consciousness, awareness, the ultimate subject? We would have first to define space. And time. The short answer to your question is consciousness is conscious. Consciousness is not the attribute of an object. only consciousness is conscious. An object is not conscious. Even a living object is not conscious because an object cannot experience consciousness. Only consciousness can experience consciousness. And that leads me to a semantic issue we have when we use the word conscious. We say, for instance, a human body can be conscious or not conscious. And we should use a different word for that. We should say, for instance, a table is not sentient. A human body may be sentient, but if this human body is in deep sleep or under anesthesia, this human body doesn't exhibit any symptoms of sentience. For instance, if I poke the object to check that the patient is well anesthetized, there is no reaction. That's an external definition. So, in common parlance, we use the word consciousness, but it's very different from the inner experience of being conscious. For instance, a sleeping subject can be unaware of my calling him. So I say, okay, he's gone, he's deeply asleep, he's not conscious. But in fact, he can be dreaming and very conscious of his dreams. So, going back to the question, is space conscious? Then the answer becomes simple. The ultimate nature of space is consciousness, consciousness-reality. So as such, since I have stated that consciousness is the only conscious thing there is, which is not a thing actually, as this reality, space is conscious. If we see, however, space as an object perceived by consciousness, appearing in consciousness, then space is not conscious. Whether space is sentient or not remains to be examined. Perhaps it is, perhaps not. A priori it isn't, since it doesn't exhibit the symptoms of consciousness, because if I call space, if I say, space, can you hear me? Space doesn't answer, therefore space didn't hear my words. So, when we think of space, we usually define space as that which is between objects. That's the first notion of space. That which is between objects. In other words, and these objects, I mean, in mathematics, they are defined as points, you know. In order to have a space, what is needed is the ability to separate objects, to identify objects. If there is no separation between objects, you don't have space. In order to have a space, you need to. And then you may be able then to measure the distance between objects with sticks or some other measuring apparatus. But the time is also important, because in fact we don't really observe points independently from time. When we observe a point or an object, there is always a time stamp at this moment, because objects change in time. Nothing is fixed. Everything flows. If we could take an object that seems to be permanent, changeless, and we could take pictures of this object, let's say a mountain, and we take a picture every 1,000 years of the mountain. And then we play this movie at 24 frames per second. Then we could see the mountain change and move like an animal. So everything changes. Everything moves. That's why the notion of objects is inherently false. There are no objects. There is only a universal flow or dance. And as a result, space and time, even conceptually, cannot be seen in isolation. And that is confirmed by modern physics. It turns out that space and time are dependent. And also, strangely enough, in modern physics, that space is dependent on the nature of space, the shape, the curvature of space is dependent on the presence of object within it, of the presence of mass and energy. So we cannot separate these three things, space-time and the content of space-time. They are one. The reality of all of that, that's where I come to. If we define space-time as that which is between events, in our experience, what is it that is there between two events, between two appearances? Obviously, consciousness. Consciousness is a continuum upon which our experience of events is superimposed. So that kind of gives us a hint that after all, consciousness, that which is in our subjective experience, is the background of our experience, and space-time, that which objectively seems to be the background of the events in the world, may be one and the same. They exhibit strangely a strange commonality. Let's put it this way. Andre, referring to an earlier question, if the mind, the finite mind, can never fully understand consciousness, is it a matter of, in a sense, bypassing the mind in the initial process of accepting that I am consciousness, and that consciousness is universal? I understand that experiencing is important in verifying this, but it almost seems that one gets to the point of making a leap of faith beyond the mind. I wonder if you could say something about this. No, we don't want a leap of faith beyond the mind. We want to experience beyond the mind. And the example I use to lead you to this understanding -- experiencing is to point at the experience through which we know that we are conscious. How do we know that we are conscious? We usually overlook the origin of this certainty. But if we investigate this question. Obviously, we know that we are conscious, not because we have been told so by our parents or in school or wherever, or we have looked it up on the internet. We know that we are conscious on our own. Now, there are two ways, then, two possibilities that remain open. One is to say that we know that we are conscious through direct experience of consciousness. And the other is to say that we are conscious not through direct experience, but through inference. I will leave it to you as a homework to show to your full satisfaction that the second possibility has to be excluded. And then only the first possibility remains. The second possibility was that we know that we are conscious through inference. And the inference goes, I see the flower, and therefore I am conscious. From the experience of the flower implies that there is consciousness. This argument is irrational. It is flawed. I leave it up to you to see the flaw that this argument is not correct. Next time, if you have not done your homework, you can ask again, and I give you the solution. Mihai, I love your formulation on the work of deconstructing of the false sense of identity. You said something along the lines that we go about deconstructing a little bit, then have breakfast, play tennis, have fun, and then, if we're excited about it, as I am, we go about deconstructing some more. Looking back, I was involved in some deconstruction of the false identity, even before having clear experiential understanding of the true identity. However, it feels I still got some benefit from it, although it had been done a little bit in the dark. So I became increasingly aware of certain patterns and psychological separate identity feelings. Now I am continuing this at a deeper level, but with clear taste and understanding of the true universal I. Now I can see those things even more clearer as they still arise sometimes, but with weaker power. I'm talking about things like arrogance, feeling of knowing better than others, superiority, as well as a hiding, not being safe, being lonely identities. Can you share how to most effectively keep deconstructing these, lifting and piercing through these veils? Once the unraveling of the false identity has begun, once this process has been set in motion, there is no coming back, there is no stopping it. There might be at some point an eagerness to be somehow proactive in this process, to accelerate it, But we have to understand that this desire to be proactive and to accelerate it is in fact part of the unraveling process itself. Provided this desire has its origin in the intuition of our impersonal nature. If this desire has its origin in ignorance, in the belief to be separate, then this desire is in fact an obstacle on the way of this process. Obstacle which the process is going to get rid of sooner than later. So, having that in mind, whatever you undertake to facilitate or accelerate the process, make sure that it flows from the understanding of the impersonal nature of self. And the second thing you have to make sure of, which is in fact related to the first thing, is that you are eager to do whatever you are doing to facilitate the process. In the absence of such eagerness or interest, don't do it. Now, the question then is what to do. What is important is whatever you do, that it comes from the understanding. In other words, it should never be applying a blind recipe, like I've been told to say, Om Bubu Aswa, no. It should always be something which makes sense. You should never you should never set aside your intelligence, in other words. Also, you can design your own exercises. The main theme is to conduct experiments asking questions from the universe. And the question is consciousness a separate reality or not? That's the general question to ask. And you can revisit the way you think, the way you feel, the way you perceive, the way you decide, the way you act, in the light of this understanding. Tseng Anna, or Anna Tseng, why is that when I hear your voice it feels like it's me speaking? Not you and me, but it feels like me. It's because it's true. That's why. And she goes on, I feel this I, but I can't put a word upon it, nor do I feel like to. I long for full understanding of it all. Can you guide me? When you have the experience you described, you are being guided. SGOK 49. It's an unsigned message. Could you please take us through an exercise to know infinite consciousness? I see rationally that infinite consciousness is a given, but need to know it. And then he says, oh yes, we need experiential knowledge. Please, your deductive syllogism and examples are good. Feels like one more step will take us through the open door. Okay, I will start with the second question. The syllogism went, number one, the first major argument is there is only one reality. The minor argument is consciousness is real. There is an element of reality. Consciousness is a reality. The conclusion, therefore, consciousness is the only reality there is. So, if we want to, that's the logic of it, the syllogism, the experiential verification is about verifying the major and the minor argument of the syllogism. I think we dwelled already on the minor argument, which is that there is an element of reality to consciousness. In other words, even if we were to deny consciousness, our very denying it would be made possible only because there is consciousness perceiving the denial. So, consciousness is that which can never not be experienced. In other words, can never be denied. So, because of this impossibility of a denial of consciousness, there is an element of reality to it. It's real. If we define reality as that which cannot not exist, if we then go to the major argument, there is only one reality. I can only give you a hint. True scientists, I'm not talking about engineers and people who are interested in technological stuff, and there are lots of people who believe to be scientists but are interested in something else. The ones that are truly interested in the laws of nature, they have this intuition about nature, about a reality which has laws, and therefore which is bigger than the universe. They explain why an electron here on Earth and an electron in a distant star or planet have exactly the same mass, the same electrical charge, and many more identical properties, because they are interrelated, that the separation between them is just an abstraction of the human mind. But in fact, their underlying reality is the same. You can call it the quantum fields, but now, this intuition that there is only one reality, I cannot prove it to you. the way to hit and to hint at it is just as I have done, seeing that everything is interconnected in the universe, that appeal to the people who are in the field of experimental science. On the more philosophical level, the argument goes that if there is more than one reality, if there are two realities, and if these realities interact, this interaction is possible only because they are part of a bigger reality, which is common and which is their ultimate reality. So if we dwell on these hints, the only one you need to convince is yourself. You see? Don't worry about convincing others. At some point, it will hit home. You will be more and more convinced of the truth that there is only one reality. It's based upon, and it's experimental. Why? Why? Because you are not a stranger in this reality. You are not a separate, you are not an alien in this reality. You are very much part of it, and therefore your reality is this reality. So it is experiential. It doesn't seem to be the case, but it is. So as you dwell more and more on this question, they will lead more and more to the experience of your reality. And as a result, the old patterns of separate realities will get deconstructed by being confronted to the experience of this reality. Randa, sometimes in meditation I experience intense bliss and inner lights. I've noticed that I can't stay with this experience for very long, so after a little while I open my eyes and the meditation ends. Please comment. I'm not sure why I'm unable to stay with this experience longer. Because this experience is still part of what is called Maya Ananda Kosha, Ananda Maya Kosha. Everything which has a beginning and an end is just a state of mind. It's important not to develop any attachment to that. It's important to understand that the goal is to be free and happy at all times. To be unburdened. And to be unburdened doesn't feel like a spiritual, intense experience, because that's too heavy. There is too much element of the body in it to tell you the truth. A happy body is not happiness. Happiness is much lighter than a happy body. And it's more free. But in a happy body, the happiness is true. So in this even in this experience, the happiness part is true. Take from this experience the part that doesn't come and go. The part that this experience reveals, but which doesn't come and go. Aaron, I was listening to Tom's complaint yesterday that Indian gurus are mostly a scam on vulnerable Westerners. It's not personal if that's any consolation. They inflict it on Indians too. His last name is Menon. I thought that Middle Eastern countries were safe, but lately I see these organizations popping up even in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, etc. Is no place sacred. On a serious note, I have a question about language. In my case, language and concept infest my every waking moment almost. Once on a recent retreat, I had a very profound, peaceful experience, a concept-free experience. But language, my internal dialogue, still kept chattering meaninglessly. But there was no motivation to bring up a concept. It was amazing, and I want it back. Can you recommend a way to be free of internal dialogue, which is so exhausting? Language, as Heidegger said, seems to be the master of man. The wrong way to go about it would be to try to suppress this inner expression. We have to be in favor of freedom of expression, both inner and outer. But as you allow for it to happen without trying to repress it, what you can do is to investigate the origin of this thought. Exercise a kind of control at the border, so to speak, of mind. So if a thought has its origin in the belief to be a separate and limited person, a separated and limited consciousness, you can do the following. You can say, okay, fine, I'm going to allow you through the gate, you thought, provided you show me that you are legit. And in other words, you are legit if it is true that consciousness is separate. Otherwise, there is no point thinking along those lines if there is no evidence that consciousness is separate. So show me your papers. Show me your papers. And the thought has to remain at the gate, not to be allowed in unless it shows proper identification. So that's one thing. That will eliminate already a lot of the thoughts. And you see, it's not an elimination through suppression. And even in the beginning, the good news is that you don't have to have a zero tolerance policy. All it takes is from time to time, you let the thought through the gate, but from time to time, you do a control. After a while, the illegitimate thoughts will stop trying to go through the gate. Now, so that's one type of thought. And this thought is a pseudo-rational thought, because it's rational is, I am a separate consciousness, therefore I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. And brrr. The second type of thought is different. It's pure noise, pure agitation. Because if this thought would stop, I would freak out. In other words, this type of thought is simply a distraction from silence. I don't want to experience silence because if I would experience a gap, I may discover things that I don't like. So I constantly obstruct. So this type of thought has to be also recognized. And when you recognize it, try to see what triggered it. Because at the origin of this thought, there is not a belief. It's more a feeling, a sense of fear, a sense of lack, something that triggers it that I don't want to look. So I create that. It's a smoke screen type of thinking. And it is not necessarily in the form of thought. We create patterns like agitation we have the legs that rest, people are like that. They create a sensation in their body that keeps them busy. It comes from a rejection of space, a rejection of silence. So see what triggers it on the feeling level. And face this music, face the feeling, allow for the feeling then to come to the surface. But you have to be interested. You see, if you're not interested, don't do it. Keep listening to your inner monologue. When you get bored again, you will do something about it, but it has to be natural. Wouter, I want to get back to the topic of yesterday when you suggested that we should extend the body at least until the four walls of the room around you. How can we do this exactly, and what exactly of the body is extended? Is the body of consciousness meant by this? No. If I try to extend my body, I would use my concentration or visualization to do so. You can, that's not the most efficient way, but when you do that, it has some level of efficiency, provided you are interested in doing it, because it breaks the old patterns of separation. So it is a little violent, so you have to be really consenting practicing this form. It belongs to the yogic approach. And he goes on, but then it becomes an exercise with a beginning and an end. Yes, it's an exercise with a beginning and an end, and you shouldn't do too much about it. And then you will ask me, well, but what's the benefits of it? You will reap the benefits during the rest of the day. At some point, if you practice that, you will notice when you don't practice it, when you don't even think about it, that you are with friends, for instance, you're in a room, and all of a sudden you see something has changed in my perception of the room, and everything seems to be within me. In other words, don't expect the benefits while you do the exercise. The exercise deconstructs just all patterns of separation. Now, I was, in my answer, I alluded to a different approach, which is a little less forceful, not the yogic approach, but which is more of the rational approach. And it's the investigative approach. You look at your experience. For instance, you can start doing that with your eyes closed. And investigate what, in the current situation, in the given context, what is it that makes you make a distinction between me and not me. Okay, I'm going to stop it here. Sorry for the questions that have not been answered. They will be answered next week. Thank you. I'll see you.